Velyka Novosilka had much to be happy about. Pryyutne was the next target for Ukrainian assault units after they had forced the Russians to flee Rivnopil without a fight and starved them out. Ukrainians attempted to take advantage of the potential chaos associated with a retreat. Russians were preparing for this long, and it was very organized. Ukrainians were stopped at the first tree lines south of Rivnopil. It is clear that the galley separates these Russian positions from the rest, complicating this group's supply and support. Ukrainians immediately adapted to the vulnerability and weakness of the Russian positions near the tree line. Ukrainians began a massive attack on the hills west of Marivka to disrupt Russian defense orders and to cut off the main supply routes to Russian positions south of Rivnopil. The operation was a great success. Ukrainians built a large bridgehead and advanced up to 2 kilometers in some areas. Ukrainian fighters of the 35th Marine Brigade displayed a captured underground installation near Staromayorsk. It turned out to be a Russian mortar unit's command post. Although all the equipment and ammunition appeared to have been removed, Ukrainians still found a lot of useful equipment. The Russian forces struggled in the tree line before Rivnopil as Ukrainians began cutting off their supplies. Ammunition shortages started, and they had to ration their spending. However, after the Ukrainians launched the flank attack, the Russian defense began to crumble like dominoes. And they moved back behind the gully. Russian sources soon reported that Russian forces had decided to retreat tactically to level and spread out the front line. Ukrainian sources stated that Ukrainian forces had entered newly captured positions and created additional certifications. They also equipped these positions for potential Russian counterattacks. Russian forces, however, did not respond to the Ukrainians' capture of positions. Instead, they devoted their entire resources to preventing a further collapse of the front line. Russian sources claimed that the Ukrainians had started deploying sabotage groups. After this, Ukrainian forces launched a series of larger attacks against Pryyutne, advancing around 300 meters. Russian analysts became panicked by the negative development and reported that 2 large Korean assault groups were being prepared, one around Makarivka and the other around Levin. These 2 assault groups are aiming to drive the Russians from Pryyutne. Russian forces have responded by launching a series of airstrikes. Ukrainians, however, continued to advance. Russian sources claimed that Ukrainians had brought large equipment for rapid assaults. Several grenade throwers were provided by Ukrainians to the front positions, according to Russian reconnaissance teams. As you know, grenades are among the most important tools for assault units. Ukrainian drone operators began undermining Russian defense capabilities, hunting down Russian trucks and armored fighting vehicles with ammunition. In one day, the Ukrainian 110th Territorial Defense Brigade destroyed up to 4 vehicles. Drone operators discovered 3 armed fighting vehicles, one they could destroy on the run. They also found a Russian car with an embedded machine gun. The Ukrainian drone detachments from the 36th Brigade and the 501st aimed at Russian positions near Pryyutne. According to the released footage, they destroyed Russian mortar crews and their equipment in coordination with recruits from retail stores. Ukrainians are planning to breach Russian defenses in Pryyutne and collapse the front line. This Russian settlement is almost in the middle of the elevated platform on the topographic map. It is also relatively large compared to other settlements, so it is the main hub for stability in the entire region. If the Russians lose this area, Ukrainians could double it almost overnight. With its resilience and determination, Ukraine has exposed Russia's Achilles heel. What is the Achilles heel exactly? This refers to an important weakness or vulnerability which can cripple an opponent. It is a breakthrough of the war between Ukraine and Russia that gave Ukraine a strategic edge. The discovery in Ukraine revolves around Russia's reliance upon supply lines and logistics support for its military activities in eastern Ukraine. Russia is a large and geographically extensive country that heavily relies on these supply routes to sustain its military forces in the conflict zones. Recognizing this vulnerability, Ukraine successfully intercepted and disrupted these supply routes, severely hampering Russia's military capabilities. Take a closer view of how Ukraine exposed Russia's Achilles heel. Ukraine has increased its efforts to destroy infrastructure, such as bridges, roads, railways, vital for Russian supply convoys. Ukraine disrupts Russian supply convoys by cutting off these routes. Ukraine has also implemented innovative strategies, such as using advanced surveillance technology, intelligence networks, and other means to identify and intercept Russian supply convoys. These tactical advances have enabled Ukraine to gain valuable insight into Russian military operations and deploy effective countermeasures. It is impossible to overstate the impact of Ukraine's disclosure. Ukraine achieved a level playing field by exploiting Russia's vulnerabilities. Ukraine has forced Russia into diverting resources and using alternative, less effective supply routes. This has stretched their capabilities and weakened their overall position. Recognizing that Russia is an adversary of considerable military strength is essential. The success of Ukraine in exposing Russia's Achilles heel shows the effectiveness and strategic thinking used in an asymmetrical war. Judging from how this front line unfolds, it is only a matter before Ukrainians liberate the settlement. The war in Ukraine is now taking a dramatic turn, with Ukraine revealing Russia's Achilles heel. Ukraine exposed a major weakness in Russia's military operation by disrupting the supply lines and intersecting vital logistics. Ukraine's resourcefulness and determination have been instrumental in challenging its adversary. Massive ammunition depot of Russian invaders destroyed. The Ukrainian army, in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, has successfully destroyed the ammunition of the Russian invaders by downing their drones. The Ukrainian army, which was destroying strategic points for the Russian army that had planned to invade Ukraine, is defeating the Russian army. Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, has stated that he wants to retake the Crimean Peninsula from Russia. The recent developments in Crimea again show the Ukrainian armies and people's determination to win. Safe Zone provides accurate and impartial reporting on all war developments. The Ukrainian army destroyed much of the ammunition the Russian occupiers of Crimea used. This shows their effectiveness as a combat force. Local resistance fighters carried out a daring attack on this massive ammunition storage facility. The goal was to weaken the enemy's grip and undermine their capabilities. This explosion has a magnitude that is just astounding. The resistance fighters dealt a serious blow to the Russians, disrupting their supply routes and significantly reducing their firepower. It is a huge victory for local resistance and a major setback for Russian invaders. We don't know the exact number of casualties, but expect much from the Russians. This destruction will have a major impact on the war. The Russian forces' operations will be severely hampered without the ammunition and other resources stored in this facility. What will happen next? What impact do you expect the discovery of Russia's Achilles heel to have on the war in Ukraine currently? Nobody knows, because you can expect anything from both sides during the war. So stay with us as we regularly bring you authentic news from the battleground.